Eat, sleep, bet, repeat. That's how we get down on the opening line at EliteSportsBetting.com. I'll be your host, Benny Ricciardi, and today we're going to dive a little further into the world of horse racing. What I really wanted to talk about today is something called conditions. Every race has certain conditions which horses are going to qualify to be allowed to be in that race. And each one of these conditions, we're looking for something a little different as handicappers when we're trying to figure out what kind of horse we want to bet on. So we're going to go through the conditions of each race, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on what I look for at each condition to try to find the horse that I think has the best chance to win. So the first condition we want to talk about here is what's called a maiden race. And a maiden race is basically for horses who have never won a race before. So there are different levels of these maiden races that we have out there. The highest level is what they call maiden special weight. Now, this is where you're going to find the horses that were bought at auction for, $1 million, a couple $100,000. Horses that the owners don't want to risk losing. These are horses that they think have, either future value in the breeding shed or horses that they think could turn out to be, champions and run in races like the Kentucky Derby and stuff like that. Maiden special weight is usually the highest level. Well, it is the highest level of racing at any track, but this is usually where you're going to find the best horses out there. Now, it's very tough to handicap maiden races because a lot of times the horses have either never run before and this is their first race, or they may have only have like one or two races under their belt here. So what you're really looking for when you're looking in a maiden race, you definitely are going to give a little bit more credit to horses who have ran before and ran well. If you run and you finish 30 lengths, behind the leader, you kind of prove that you don't have the talent to really be at this level. But you can't really knock a horse that doesn't run really well his first time out. Think about any new thing that you've ever done in your life. You don't go out there the first time you do it and be an expert at it. Some people actually do, and some horses actually do as well. And those usually wind up being the ones who do go on and have a chance to run in races like the Kentucky Derby and things like that. But for the most part, you're going to see a lot of horses that have, maybe 2 or 3 lifetime starts. Those starts may be good or bad. What we really want is the horses who look pretty good in the starts that they've had, because with young horses, you would expect a lot of improvement early on. So if a horse comes in second and maybe loses by maybe a length or 2 lengths or something, that's basically like he won a winning race. So the next time he goes out there, there's a good chance he's going to move forward, do better off that last effort, and be somebody who could actually win this race here today. So especially in maiden special weights, what I'm usually looking for is a horse who's ran maybe once or twice before over the horses who have never ran before. And I'm looking for a horse who in that 1 or 2 times they ran actually showed that they were a pretty good horse. Maybe they finished second or third. They were close to the pace. They ran a pretty decent speed number. Things like that are the advantage that you're going to get when you're looking there. Now, maiden special weight being the top end of the curve, there's also something called maiden claiming races. Basically, the claiming races is kind of the bottom of the barrel for horses who have never won a race before. A lot of times a horse will start out in a special weight because the owner thinks he has something special. And then when he realizes the horse isn't all that great, it puts him in a maiden claiming race where anybody can actually claim that horse and buy him right out of that race if they wanted to. It's very expensive to keep a racehorse. So if the horse isn't making money and isn't winning races, a lot of times the owners kind of want to cut their losses. So they'll just put him down in a maiden claiming race, hoping to get some of their money back with a purse win and hoping that somebody will come along and claim that horse. Maiden claiming races are a little bit different than maiden special weight races. If you see a horse that's ran 8, 9, 10 times and has never won and hasn't broken his maiden, it's a really good chance that he's probably not going to do it again today. So again, we're still looking for lightly raced horses that have a chance to improve, maybe 2 or 3 races overall. But the other thing I look at a lot when I'm looking at maiden claiming races is what they call a drop down. And like we mentioned, the maiden special weight races are for the cream of the crop at whatever track you're at, whereas the maiden claiming races are kind of for the bottom of the barrel. So after a jockey or after a trainer or an owner will run a horse a couple times in maiden special weight and not have any luck, they may do what we call drop them down into the maiden claimers. The difference is they're running against a completely different caliber of horse here. So even if they didn't look good in the maiden special weight running against the better horses, that doesn't mean that they can't drop down and, win against the bottom of the barrel horses. A good example of this is, you look at an NBA player who's sitting at the end of the bench, a guy who's the 10th, 11th, 12th player on the bench. Versus other NBA players, that guy is obviously not very good. That's why he's the 10th, 11th, 12th player at the bench. But if you put him against normal people in a basketball game, he's going to dominate. If you play one-on-one against a guy at the end of the bench on an NBA team, that guy's going to beat you 21-2 or 21-3. People don't realize how much of a difference there is between playing at the top level and playing at the bottom level. And it's the same thing in horse racing. Just because you couldn't beat horses that are going to go on and have a chance to run in the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup and, all these other big time races, doesn't mean you can't beat a bunch of scrubs that are standing around on the corner. And with horse racing, it's the same thing. The horses running into maiden claimers are the ones who really don't have the talent to be running against these higher caliber horses. Again, if you have 7 horses in a maiden special weight race, maybe 2 or 3 of them are going to go on and be really good race horses. The rest of them, though, will probably eventually wind up dropping down into that lower level in order to get that win and break their maiden and move on and run into other type of races. So when you're looking at a maiden claimer race, you still want lightly raced horses, but one thing that I look at and I will give more credit to is a horse that's dropping down from a maiden special weight. Because even though he didn't run well at that level, that doesn't mean that he can't run well at this level. A lot of times we'll see horses drop down from maiden special weight to maiden claiming and finally get that elusive first victory to move on into other kind of races. So after you win your maiden, right, after you win your first race as a racehorse and you move on, there's really 2 paths that you can go. Technically, there's 3, but we'll talk about the third one in a minute. Excuse me. So the one path for winners is what we call allowance races. So what an allowance races is, it's usually, you'll see something along the lines of like allowance N1X or something along those lines, or N2X eventually. What that means is non-winners of 1 race other than your maiden, or non-winners of 2 races other than your maiden and 1 other allowance race. So this is the path that a lot of good horses will take. You win a maiden special weight, you win a maiden claimer. Your next step on the ladder is to try to win what's called an allowance race. So the allowance race now is going to be different than the maiden and the maiden claimer, because every horse in this allowance race has at least 1 win. Some of them may even have more than 1 win, because there are certain types of races, some low-level claiming races, things like that, that don't count against you running in a non-winners of 1 race in an allowance level. So the allowance races usually have a little bit of a higher purse, usually a little bit more formful. You usually have some of the better horses at a track that are running, trying to get through we call them the conditions, so trying to get through their conditions in that race. So in an allowance race, you're really looking for a horse who not only won his maiden race, but did it in a convincing fashion, right? Because now you have 7 horses in the race. All 7 of them have won a race before. But there's a difference between winning a fast race at today's distance or winning a slow race at a distance that's other than the one today, where maybe that win doesn't translate as well. So, for example, if this is a 1-mile race, and a bunch of the horses in this race broke their maiden at 6 furlongs, at 3/4 of a mile, I'm going to kind of tick those guys down because I haven't seen them run this distance yet. If you see a horse who actually won his maiden at a mile and now is running back at a mile or a mile and a 16th, that's a guy who I would give a little bit more of an advantage to over a horse who's only ran at 6 furlongs or 5 furlongs or, 5.5 furlongs, something like that. Same thing goes for a horse who's only won a race on turf coming over to dirt or vice versa. If you haven't seen a horse do something before, if his past performance hasn't shown you that he's capable of it, then you shouldn't think that he's going to be able to do it. It doesn't mean that a horse that's never ran on dirt or is running on dirt or on turf for the first time can't win, but it's not as likely as somebody who's done it and proven that they're able to do it before. A lot of past performance and a lot of predictive analysis is based on taking what you've seen in the past and projecting it going forward. And when you look at it, you've seen that a lot of horses who have won at a certain distance will be able to win or run well at that distance again. Whereas when you look at a horse who's never ran at that distance, you're basically rolling the dice. Maybe he can do it, maybe he can't. But I don't want to bet on maybes. I want to bet on things that I'm, pretty sure of or have a pretty good idea or is what's going to happen. So when you look at an allowance race, the thing you're really looking for is a horse that ran at the distance he's running at today and did it well. He won his race, but maybe he won his race in a time that's better than the times that the other horses ran their races for. That's the kind of horse that I'm usually looking at for an allowance race. And now remember, there's also a big difference between a horse who won their maiden in their first or second race and a horse who needed 7 or 8 tries to win their maiden. If it took you 7 or 8 tries to win your maiden, you've seen this horse run 7 or 8 times already. You can't think that there's a lot more improvement that's going to come. Any improvement that he made is probably the improvement that he needed just to get over the hump of winning that first race. Whereas a horse that goes out in his first or second race and wins, there's a good chance that that horse can keep moving forward. And we haven't seen the best of him yet. I would much rather take a lightly raced horse in an allowance that has a good number and ran at this distance and has done well, than go ahead and roll the dice on somebody who it took him 8 tries to break his maiden. If you only have one win in 8 tries, you're not going to have, you're probably not going to have the same type of career trajectory as a horse that had one win in 2 or 3 tries, where he's moving forward, still improving, and we haven't seen the best out of him yet. That guy that had the 8 races, we've probably seen the best out of him already. So I wouldn't expect them to move forward. So when you're looking at allowance races, that's really what you want to look. You want lightly raced horses, ones who have shown that they have some ability, and ones who have shown that ability at the distance. If you can find horses like that, they're usually the ones that I'm looking to bet on there. Now, just like maiden special weight was the high end of the market for horses that never won, that's what allowance races are for horses that have only 1 or 2 wins. The lower end of the market in maiden races was maiden claiming, and the horses that run in there very often will come back into just a regular claiming races for winners. Now, these can get very, very hairy when you start looking at the conditions of the race. Right at the top of every race sheet, when you're looking at the past performance, you'll see things along the lines of, claiming race for non-winners of 2 races this year, or claiming race for somebody who's never won more than $10,000. There's all kinds of different conditions. And they do this to kind of limit the number of horses that can go into a race, but they also will massage them to make sure they have enough horses. If you're somebody who's a racing secretary, you need to make sure you got enough horses that qualify for whatever the condition of the race that you're trying to do is, that you could actually run a race that has more than 2 or 3 horses running. Races that only have 3, 4 horses running are horrendous for betting because there aren't enough different options for you to get good payouts. And it's usually something that handicappers stay away from. But if you can get 7 or 8 horses into a race, now there's a whole bunch of different combinations that could come out, a whole bunch of different ways that you could spread out the money in the pool, and then you can actually get some decent winning bets. So this is what handicappers are really looking for. I will go on to say, usually claiming races are early in the card, race 3, race 4, race 5, early in the day. And they are some of the toughest races to handicap. And the reason why they're so tough is the horses running in these races are not good and they're not consistent. Every once in a while, they could pop up and have a really good race, and you could be like, wow, that's a pretty good horse. But if that horse was able to do that consistently, the owner wouldn't risk losing him. He wouldn't be running him in a claiming race where somebody can claim him. What he would be doing is keeping him in the allowance races or moving him into a stakes race where you don't have to worry about somebody coming along and claiming him. There are people who sit there and, trainers and some owners who will just look for horses that are in claiming races that have more talent than they have kind of shown. And they go out there, if it's a $10,000 claimer race, you basically can pay $10,000 and buy that horse right out of that race. So again, you're risking losing the horse, and you normally wouldn't risk losing a really good horse. And that's what makes claiming races so tough is you can look at the speed figures, you can look at the races that this horse has had in his past, and you can be like, wow, this is a guy who should win this race. But a lot of times you don't know exactly. Sometimes a trainer who has a horse that, maybe is breaking down or maybe is not running as well as he used to, will drop him in claiming just hoping somebody comes along and picks him up and takes him off his hands. That happens quite a few times. So for me, claiming races, I'm not saying I don't play them, but you won't see me put many of my big bets of the day on a claiming race because there's just so many variables and so many things that, there's not a lot of certainty there. And again, if we're putting our hard-earned money on something, we want the predictive analytics to be able to show us that there's a lot of certainty that this horse is going to run well or is going to be able to improve and get better. And with claiming races, it's completely a crapshoot. They do run claiming races for younger horses, but a lot of times you'll see claiming races for like 4 and 5 and 6-year-old horses, horses that have been around for a while. They know that they're not going to wind up being superstars. They probably don't bring a lot of value in the breeding shed for them to even bother, breeding them. So this is usually the kind of horse you see there. And again, it's very inconsistent, very, kind of freaky with with the post positions and the finishes when you see a race like this. So these are the kind of races where I would be more apt to play a 10-1 favorite or a 15-1 favorite, or where I would probably be more likely to fade a 3-5 favorite. Because again, if a horse was that good and that consistent, he probably wouldn't be running in this condition to begin with. So definitely want to keep that in mind whenever you're handicapping claiming races, which you usually get at least 2 or 3 of on any card. So the last kind of race we're going to talk about is the stakes race. And these are the ones that a lot of you guys have heard of. Now, the stakes races even have their own hierarchy here. So they call them graded stakes races. The top races in the country, the Kentucky Derby, the Breeders' Cup, the Haskell, like a lot of the big races that you look at and you see, the horses whose names you might know, those are the horses that are running in what's called the stakes races. And the stakes races are where you get the biggest purses. So, the Kentucky Derby, couple $1 million purse there. The Breeders' Cup, $500,000 $1 million purses, depending on which race it is there. This is where the best of the best are. This is the cream of the crop. This is the professionals out there, the NBA, the MLB, the NFL, however you want to think about it in terms of other sports. These stakes races will also have conditions, like the Kentucky Derby. You have to be a 3-year-old horse. You have to have a certain amount of lifetime winnings to qualify to get in there. It's not like anybody can run, even though everybody wants to run in those races. There are certain things that you have to do to qualify for that. Normally, the owners have to put up a certain amount of money as well. Might be $5,000, $10,000 in order to enter their horse in this race. Some of that goes to the pool. The rest of the money is paid by, the money that the track makes on everybody betting on these races. So there's grade 1 stakes races, there's grade 2 stakes races, there's grade 3 stakes races. It's kind of like the equivalent of, I don't want to say like Major League AA, AAA or whatever. That's not really the way it goes, but it's probably better to look at it as like a college. Let's look at it as college football, right? So the grade 1 stakes races would be like the SEC. That would be the best conference where you have all the best races. Any one of those horses dropping down into a grade 2 or grade 3 or even just a regular level allowance race are probably going to dominate their field there. But when you take 10 or 12 of the best horses at a certain distance under a certain condition and put them together, you could be a horse that comes in 7th or 8th place in a stakes race where you probably would have won the allowance race on the card at the same distance. That's the difference in the caliber of it. But again, those horses are also getting paid a lot more money to run in those stakes races. You win a stakes race with a $500,000 purse. The owner's going to take $300,000 of that. Trainer gets 10%, jockey gets 10%. The owner gets, about $250,000 in his pocket at the end of the day. So that's the ultimate goal for trainers. They want to run there. Stakes races, to me, are one of the easiest things to handicap, but one of the hardest ways to make money. And the reason I say that is it's the complete opposite of the claiming races where nothing is consistent. In the stakes races, you have the most consistent horses out there. A guy who consistently runs fast times faster than the track average is probably going to continue to run fast times faster than the track average, which is going to put him up there towards the top of any stakes race that is running it. Now, again, grade 1 races, grade 2 races, grade 3 races, depending on what it's for, depending on the distance, depending on, the age conditions, there really isn't a ton of difference between a lot of grade 1 and grade 2 races. Grade 1 to grade 3 races, there is a noticeable difference, but I don't want to go ahead and say it's huge. Again, you still have some of the better horses here. This would be a situation where it's like the difference between maybe AAA and the major leagues or, AAA or NCAA basketball and NBA basketball. You still have some of the best people on the planet or some of the best horses on the planet running in those conditions, but there is a slight difference between, the guy who's the stud college basketball player and a guy who's a stud NBA player. The stud NBA player, that's the graded 1 races. The stud college player, probably like the grade 3 races. Now, there are also stakes races that are ungraded. A lot of times these will be like state bred races, meaning like every state uses the races as a way to kind of help out the breeders in that state, the people who make their living by, breeding and raising and taking care of horses. So you'll see a lot of state bred races, and you'll see like a little square with an S next to it. That means it's a state bred race. And if you don't see like ALW for allowance or CLM for claiming, it's a good reason why it's there. Now you'll see some of these smaller stakes races. They run a lot of them at smaller tracks, places like Monmouth Park, places like Laurel, places like Delaware Park. That's where you'll see a lot of these smaller stakes races. It might be like usually it's a pretty decent purse, $60,000 to $100,000, meaning that the winning owner gets $60,000 win or a $35,000 win. Pays out his jockey, pays out his trainer, keeps the rest of it, the other 80% for himself. These are still better than the average. I will say this, they're definitely better than claiming races. And most tracks, some of these smaller stakes races are better than your average allowance race, but it's a lot closer there. They're not they're not the same as, there's a big difference between an allowance race and a graded stakes race. Depending on the distance and depending on the track, there may not be much of a difference between the kind of horse that's running in a high level allowance race and a low level stakes race. Those two are pretty equal to each other. So when you're handicapping one of those, you don't want to discount, oh, well, he only won an allowance race. If you win a 75K optional allowance race, that's probably about equivalent at most tracks to winning a, $60,000 small stakes race. So that's kind of the hierarchy of it. So when you look at a racing form and you see, this horse did well at this condition or that condition, it gives you an idea of what you're looking for. So just to kind of recap this stuff, with the maiden races, those are horses that never won before. So we're looking for lightly raced horses that have shown some talent and have a chance to improve. Allowance races, you want the horses that won those those maiden races in very convincing fashion. Preferably the younger ones, because that still means they have room to improve. But you want horses that ran against maidens and pretty much dominated them and proved that they were a class or a level above. With claiming races, like I said, it's a little bit of a crapshoot because you've seen some horses who've ran well before, and you've also seen horses who have not ran well before. So a lot of times in the claiming races, those are the races where I'm willing to take some more chances, bet against some more of the favorites, bet on some more of the long shots there, because there is more of a chance that those horses are going to win those kind of races. Because remember, the claiming races, those horses are not consistent. And then you move up to the stakes races, right? Now we're at the top of the charts here. These are the horses whose names you might know. These are the horses that cost a couple $100,000. These are the ones that probably have a future in the breeding shed. With stakes races, it's very formful. It tends to be the really good horses keep running really well. Occasionally, you'll get a new horse stepping up. But to me, it's always like the prove it thing, right? Like, yeah, we know this guy was a good college basketball player, but let's see Zion do something in the pros before we start putting him up there as one of the best players in the NBA. It's the same thing with these stakes races, right? Like, I'm betting on the LeBron Jameses. I'm betting on a Kevin Durant. I'm betting on that caliber of horse in the stakes race. Can a Zion step up? Can a young, lightly raced 3-year-old step up and challenge some of these horses? They can, but it's more the exception than the rule. So really, you want to see the horses who've been through the wars, have won the wars or have been up there towards the lead in the wars, horses that have hit the board in graded stakes races before. Those horses are going to get a bump up even over horses that have allowance wins and smaller stakes wins, because we've already seen them run against the best of the best and they've proven that they belong there. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an idea of the different conditions that you see. Every time you look at a race, one of the first things they say is, this is a non-winners of 2 going a mile, or this is a, maiden claimer for 4-year-olds and up that have 2 wins or something like that. It gives you an idea of what you're looking for when you're looking at the past performance to try to find the type of horse that can win this race. And knowing the type of horse that can win this race is going to put you on winners more often and make you a more profitable horse bettor. So that sums it up for our opening line today, breaking down conditions of horse racing. I do want to let you guys know, if you go over to my Twitter page at BennyR11, we just got a promo code from TVG over at Elite Wins. We've been sending them a lot of business lately with, obviously a lot of other sports closing down, and the fact that we got 100, 150 people in the chat room every day betting on horses in the afternoon on through the evening so that we can get a little bit of action there. So TVG decided to partner with us. We have a promo code now where they'll give you one free $200 bet. So you can definitely make a score with that free $200 bet. I will post it underneath this video in the link here today. You can also get it on my Twitter page at BennyR11, or you can find it over at the Elite Wins homepage right now. Again, today's going to be a big day for racing. We got Gulfstream Park coming on. The rest of the week, we're going to have even more tracks that we're going to be playing and betting on. So if you haven't signed up already, sign up for the weekly pass and check it out. It's only $30. Go over to Elite Wins and sign up for that. Come into the vault with us. You'll see everybody betting on the horses, talking about the races. We watch them together in real time. We celebrate in real time. I mean, listen, we're in tough times here right now, guys. And this is something that kind of takes your mind off of everything that's out there. Gives you a little chance to gamble, make some money, make some friends, and kind of return a little bit of normalcy to your life. So for Benny Ricciardi at Elite Wins, this has been another episode of The Opening Line.